No, I can't hear it. Good evening and welcome to the Dissenting Goyim Show, brought to you by Dyed in the Wool History Productions. Um, and this week has been interesting, and we are glad to have y'all back here listening to us. And so I'm just going to get to it, right? I was going to start with Iran or the Iran conflict. However, Providence has spoken, and yesterday has given us a very interesting look into, actually today too, interesting look into where the MAGA movement is now and how it is brutally falling apart. And I really enjoyed actually Candace's description of it, which is the MAGA, Make Israel Great Again, because it does summarize how much this movement has been not just hijacked, but it's been destroyed. There's no more MAGA left. Anybody that wanted to make America great again, you better find a different movement, a different person. Maybe we could turn back the clock and go with the old Ron Paul narrative and the Rand Pauls, and the Thomas Masseys, because those are really all who we have left to hold on to for the idea that America can be saved. And really, from the way we're looking at it, I'm not sure, right? So just this week, we've had an interesting moment of what we call religious liberties, and it has been an religious liberty commission put together by Donald Trump to show how much he cares about religion. Well, realistically, he doesn't. How do we know that? Is because once Israel was pressed and they were up against a wall by a Catholic, we saw what happened. That seems to be a very repetitive cycle in history where the Catholics seem to be the ones that are easiest to be removed, and people tend, they're not, I'm sorry, not the easiest to be removed, but they're the ones that will always be removed because they always question the best, right? So, uh, the interesting aspect of this is that it goes against one, the First Amendment, because we don't have freedom of religion, especially when we pick one over everything else and call it, our social justice, so to speak, right? In 1787, our founding fathers went to great lengths to launch the best counter revolution that has ever been made in American history, because specifically they launched a counter revolution to prevent what is happening now, to prevent the Jewish merchants of the East India companies that had absolute total control over the markets in America, that had our major cities turned into essentially cesspools, moralist areas where people were falling for the same old crap that we're seeing now. Okay, the sexualized, the alcoholic, the um over addicted people that want to become idle, and they're not doing much, right? Well, sorry, they want to become idle, and they're not learning much. They're just kind of there. Well, our founding fathers recognized that that was a significant problem, that we have to build our own industry, be independent from this. Otherwise, we will find ourselves completely colonized by this specific group. Now, our founding fathers went into convention. They decided that they were going to have a federal republic that was highly restricted, even down to the money. And despite Alexander Hamilton creating powers that were not there, that he called implied powers, our Constitution said things plain and simple, right? Can't coin money, can't create banks. Um, you know, you can't make treaties with, states can't make treaties with other powers, right? That's the federal government. The states gave up some sovereignty. In return, they were protected, and everybody went along with the American experiment. Well, after that, our second generation of founders made sure they developed the industry. The founding fathers developed the structure, the plan. The second generation of founders, which are the kids of those founding generation, upheld the experiment, and they said, we are going to make sure we are free of any of these uh, other foreign powers, right? You had Monroe establish the American identity. You had Thomas Handelside Perkins establish the a trade that would allow him to reinvest into industry, and you had everybody on the same page, to the point that in 1830, America was almost unstoppable as far as progress in industry and economic power and where they were in the world and how they could defend themselves, and all because we had the right structure, the right plan, and we made sure we were independent. Right. So we see something that was the last hiccup in the plan for these people, and that's the freedom of religion. Right. Freedom of religion is to make sure everyone in America can say, well, you have the freedom of speech. You can say what you want. And you can worship who you want. Well, at the strike of a pen yesterday, we found out that that's not ever the case anymore. That we must choose a religion to worship the best and the most and create a God out of it over everything else because why? They are leeches to society. And so we had this Religious Liberties Commission convene, and we saw a Catholic put Israel to the wall. And not only did she put Israel to the wall, she put Zionists to the wall and asked very specifically what is the definition of anti-Semitism, because it seems to be malleable and that could be applied to absolute anything and everything. And you have people like Ted Cruz and Ben Shapiro and all these other people repeating the same damn talking points that they think. It's that they get paid to say, and so we saw this. We saw it very wonderfully put. It was Carrie Jean Boyler, right? She said, "What is this definition?" And then she followed it up with, "Well, as a Catholic, I don't honor that, and so does that make me anti-Semite, an anti-Semite?" Now, of course, anybody knows that. Well, they're not Semitic people. Not Catholics, but the Israelis are not Semitic people. They were from Eastern Europe. Their language is westernized. Asked Elazar, or look into Elazar ben Yudah, his story, who was paid by the Rothschilds to create a new language, a new version of it, right? And they hated everything about any of the orthodoxy beliefs. They moved forward looking to settle Israel and remove everybody else from there. They were the Jews, but not Jews. They were as Revelations 2:8-11 says, the synagogue of Satan, because they didn't care. They wanted the name, they wanted the hereditary title and the prophecy. So let's take a listen to this clip real quick, and we can find out just where Donald Trump stands in making America great again. Because one comment that I got on here was it was to protect freedom. Well, Donald Trump did not protect freedom because the very person questioning this was removed. So we can all sit there and watch a bunch of Zionists agree that we should all worship Israel, the golden calf. So here we go. Let's go ahead and listen wholeheartedly to this and recognize this as a problem.
So I need to ask you, in a country built on religious liberty in the First Amendment, do you believe someone can stand firmly against anti-Semitism, including what you experienced, and at the same time condemn the mass killing of Palestinians in Gaza, or reject political Zionism, or not support the political state of Israel? Or do you believe that speaking out about what many Americans view as genocide in Gaza should be treated as anti-Semitic? Because in my view, the United States cannot and must not make loyalty to a particular theology about Israel a litmus test for protected speech or moral legitimacy.
What I'll say is that Natan Sharansky says there's three things that you shouldn't do with Israel. You shouldn't delegitimize it, you shouldn't demonize it, and you shouldn't apply a double standard. You can abide by those three things, you're not anti-Semitic.
So by not being a Zionist, does that make you an anti-Semite?
I don't think you need to be a Zionist to support a country that defends itself and is free and religious in a hostile neighborhood.
So is anti-Zionism
Hold on
anti-Semitism?
one second, Carrie.
Yes.
It is. It is.
Sorry. Yes.
You know, I'm a Catholic, and Catholics do not embrace Zionism, just so you know. So are all Catholics anti-Semites, according to you?
As I said, anti-Zionism, by denying the right of the Jews to have their own state while not saying the same for any other peoples, that is a double standard, hypocrisy, and anti-Semitism.
So just to be clear, are Catholics anti-Semites?
Carrie, excuse me. I'm going to interrupt the discussion. Our committee is focused on religious liberty taken from all people, This is not the commission for that.
Right, but
And-
we're
and so
talking
you
about a
were-
foreign nation, so I want to be clear on what the definition of anti-Semitism is. If I don't support the political state of Israel, am I an anti-Semite? Yes or no?
They already answered.
Now, the guy in the video, Dan Patrick, is the one who claimed to have removed her from the Religious Liberties Commission, right? And well, there are some issues with that. He's become arguably one of the most hated people here, is because we see that anything we have with the idea of freedom and our First Amendment is going away. That was the last offense. And that's essentially telling us that America is a Jewish country that believes in the Jewish ideology, that believes that anybody else that's not of that belief, a Zionist, a Jewish worshiper, then you don't have a say in America and you are automatically anti Semitic. Now, we can look not past, now we shouldn't look past the idea that they are denying the West Bank their right to live, the Christians there. They're denying them their right to live. They're denying everybody in that area. They're now forcing America to deny Iran their right to live. They're forcing America to deny the Iraqis their right to live. They're forcing America to deny Syrians their right to live. They're forcing America to deny the Afghanis right to live. But yet, if we challenge their right to be a country, which they're sea people don't have a home. They leech and go places. They take over countries, usury, currency exchange, and anything else they can pry their teeth into until they suck that country dry. We need to find this as a problem. We need to see it as a problem. No, it's not anti-Semitic. It is just the idea that people that aren't from here don't get to leech off of our society. And as the saying went in the 1830s and 40s, right, is America for Americans, and the American identity, the independent America, the golden age that we once had is gone. And we need to recognize that we either bring that back or we die a very, very, very dark and brutal death, which starts with Iran whipping us in war, Russia and China as well. So, James, welcome back. We have a lot to say about Zionism. What do you take on that clip? What does that say for the overall picture of America?
Well, I'll point out something in the Zionist response there. The only country that I can think of that has membership in a particular religion or culture as a criteria for admission and citizenship is Israel. And specifically, the Catholic monarchies, largely through the efforts of the Sea People, the Jewish merchants, were one by one destroyed. So the argument's absolutely ridiculous. Zionism is a political position. The original Zionists were all Marxist, by the way, and many of the Jews in that time period, and between the war time period, were not actually Zionist. It was a minority position. It was a very hard thing to sell that to the Jewish population at the time, especially in the United States. It took the Supreme Court justice and several other very prominent Jewish figures to drive that point home. And it took a long time.
Yeah, it was hardly supported then, and they picked up support just because they dominated the parties, right? I saw there was a lot of irony. I saw a post today where Donald Trump was calling Thomas Massie a rhino, right? Which, if we look at the definition of rhino, which is the establishment, the big money people of that party who are doing things for foreign interests and their own interests, right? And then we look at this happening and we look at Iran and we go, isn't Donald Trump doing that? Right? They've taken over America through political parties, and they got both parties. It's not a blue and red, right? And so, but now we start to see it. Where are we going with Zionism? It's starting to lose its steam because people are losing faith. What would you say? Is it the last breath?
I think people are waking up a little bit. So conservatism in America has always had a couple branches. It started out as largely anti-war and then anti-New Deal or government expansion movement, but it really grew out of World War I and a rejection of internationalism and foreign military adventures. Then over time, especially following World War II, it was taken over by the New Right, who were the defenders of their version of Christianity against the impending communist takeover of the world, which was never going to happen, to begin with. But people were afraid of it, so it sold very well, and actually sold to Catholics too, which is what made it kind of gave it its tipping point. So can we get away from that? Maybe you get maybe 10% of the population that understands what's going on. You can, but it also requires some understanding of Jewish history. So what has tended to happen with the Sea People is they've gone from one civilization to the other and largely destroyed it, which is what happens when financialization brings that about. A free people needs to be able to produce what they consume. And we're next on the menu, or we're on the going down right now. Will enough people figure it out? I don't know. The churches are a big factor, and penetrating that, especially with the older population, is difficult because they trust Fox News. And the again, Jewish history has purposely been almost erased.
Right. They hijacked it, which seems to be their motto here, their cycles that they go in and hijack, right? We look at the Phoenicians, they hijacked that area, which they were the Phoenicians, right? Then they move around to where they could leech off of any given society they can. And America's no different, right? It's the Constitution was a counter revolution to their movement. It was either they create or they consume the colonies, the states, or America do something differently. And that's where we see the golden age show up of America when they're not there, right? When they're removed wholeheartedly and we have our own industries, but yet we see a downfall when they're here, right? During the Articles of Confederation, when they had almost complete control of this area, it was failing. America was essentially going to be a failed experiment. And then, after 1865, we saw America start tumbling down. And granted, this group is the reason why we had 1 million deaths coming out of 1865 in that war, is because they wanted our industries, and that's how they got a hold of it.
But if I could add something to it, the Puritans were so intertwined with the Amsterdam, Antwerp, Jewish population. They're all basically Sea People. The Puritans were just another Protestant form of the same thing.
Yeah, they're second rate. I would argue that they're second rate Jews by their standards. Is that they
and the Huguenots
yeah, and the Huguenots, right? They all work together. That's what I like to refer to as the mixed multitude merchant connection. There is they all work together. The French are notorious for being the foot soldiers of things, which is why when we see Candace making the accusations against the French, it's that they're there. They are the foot soldiers. The Puritans are always the middlemen. They're the merchants, so to speak, and then the Jewish merchants from Amsterdam were always the financiers. And that was how their structure went, and it's how it's still going, right? We can say that these East India companies don't exist, but yet they do. Still, they just look slightly different than what they did back then.
Well, interesting quote. Let me throw a quote in here from Chaz Wiseman, who was the first president of Israel. I don't have it in front of me, so I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit, but he said that back in that time period, they had the East India companies, which were effectively a virtual country, but that's no longer available. So therefore, they needed basically a brick and mortar, so to speak, country, and that was what gave birth to Zionism.
Right, and so that would you say that was what Israel essentially became, that company?
Oh,
that area
absolutely.
right
Yeah,
border.
it's a East India company with a permanent address.
Right, that controls that area, because once you control the East Indies and the that Middle Eastern area, Near Eastern, or East Indies, whatever, right, that area is, you tend to control the hegemonic or the hegemony of Western Europe. That's kind of
And,
that exchange there, and that's how they've always been. You had the Venetians control the Ottomans. You had everywhere else, the Dutch and English East India Company control underneath there, but Israel is kind of the middleman for these companies all to come together.
yeah, and the British saw it that way too. That was almost a British satellite. That's how Lloyd George perceived it going down to the end of World War One, and that area, which kind of leads us back to Iran, is of critical importance.
Right. Now, the interesting thing, right, we consider ourselves to be, and this goes along with the First Amendment, we consider ourselves to be the morally upright country, right? And we see all this and we recognize the hell that the East India companies have done over the years, right? Which is why the irony here that China is creating the essentially a ginormous wall between Donald Trump and Iran, is because we've done so much to China that we almost deserve that fate, right? Well, we do, to be honest with you. But it's like we see that, but then we don't recognize that things like what they're doing in Gaza is just downright evil, right? We don't recognize, like, America doesn't recognize the fact that Israel's shown up so many times in the Epstein files, connected to trafficking and other weird ritualistic, sacrifices of, I would argue, sacrifices of kids, because that seems to be they're what they worship there, because we look at, what's his name, what's the Herzl, Theodore Herzl, there we go, who was into some weird things. You see Frankish, like Jacob Frank was into that really weird stuff. Same thing with Sabbatean. And we see this history of them, but yet when we see the destruction that they do, we just go, oh, it's because the Muslims have denied them their right to live, while they're denying Muslims their right to live.
Well, we have a very short memory, or we didn't know a lot of things in the first place. We weren't taught it, and the narrative that people picked up after 9/11 is that the Muslims were always persecutors of the Jews, which wasn't true. The Jews actually got along. There are different branches of Jews, Ashkenazi, Sephardic, and subgroups of that. But they actually got along quite well with the Muslims. They did very well. Like, say, in Spain, when after the Reconquista, the Jewish population there with the Muslims, they did fine. They prospered. The Christian peasants, not so much. And the wars, by the way, between Muslims and Christians were typically almost entirely Sunnis, not Shia. That's another interesting point to file away. But we were given an enemy that would seem greater than you could typically paint in a normal story, a bigger than life enemy. And it was just easy, it was easy to believe for people that didn't know any of the history of it. I remember people that I know would say, "Oh, they fought over in the Middle East for 2,000 years." Well, no, actually, they didn't. The Middle East had different, ethnically and religiously diverse, but it was relatively peaceful until the British and the Americans went there.
Yeah, and that's one thing, especially like when we look at the Portuguese, which the however connected that East India Company was to the Templar, right? Is that the spice trade was not there weren't the marauders all the time on that,
Yeah.
it was peaceful. They traded peacefully because everybody had a piece of that pie, right? So they had to get along with each other. And the same thing, like if you look at Christians today, it's like we need to ask the question first and foremost is who takes care of the holy sites? Do the Jews within their borders take care of the holy sites for Christians? And the answer is no, because they hate Christians, right? It's who takes care of them? Muslims, the Muslim king of Jordan. He's the one that puts most of the money down to take care of, say, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and other sites.
And Assad in Syria took care of Christians and protected them.
And how did America repay him?
Well, I guess we know that story, don't we? At least he's
Right.
still alive.
At least he's still alive. But the fact of the matter is we not only destroyed Syria after trying 4 times, thanks Barack Obama. We created ISIS, who went in and destroyed thousands of years of history because this group here is working so damn hard to erase history and create their own.
Well,
Create
his
their own
history
and
is
their own.
important to erase. That way, you have something you don't like, you can just change it. It's like a virtual reality card game. You don't like what people see, well, change it. Then everything's fine again. And that's about where we're at. There's no collective memory, and there's no really minimal intellectual understanding or interest in history.
That's
Hopefully
because
I think it's changing a little bit.
well, and that's because it's presented so boring because they've created this make-believe history for everything. Right down to America because they wanted to hide their fingerprints, right? They hid their fingerprints from the American Revolution. They hid their fingerprints from the War of 1812. They hid their fingerprints from, even the wars between Alexander and Napoleon, right? Those guys didn't realize why they were fighting each other. They sat there and you could see their letters. They said, "I have no idea why the hell we're against each other right now. It doesn't make any sense." Then you see the Crimean War, sorry. Then you see like the American War between the states, is their fingerprints were all over that. The only reason we went to war was because of them. And I know people want to say slavery, but it's just downright not true. When we look at the East Indies and what happened after that war, it's like that was why we went there. That was why we created war in the first place. And it's like they change history. Then you go in and change the Sumerian, the Mesopotamian history there because you start destroying it. For what? Eventually, someone's going to ask a question, right?
We hope.
Yeah, we hope. Let's shift gears though, because it's we see this connection here. We're gonna kind of tie this in, right? Is that during America's golden age, right? We look at our very brief questions on the Middle East, right? And the idea of whether or not we should interfere in conflicts. Okay. And so that was at the peak of the not the peak. Well, yeah, the peak of the Ottoman Empire, which I guess peak in a way that they was kind of tapering off, but it still had some movement because there was still British involvement, which the East India Company were very much involved with Ottoman wars, and how they were funding them to create a buffer zone for, say, Russia and into Greece, right? And so when in question, America, was pushed to send aid to Greece to help combat the Ottoman invasion or the Ottoman rule over there. Our merchants, who are very smart, very talented, very much not Jewish, and very much outplaying the Jewish merchants at that time, Thomas Handelside Perkins amongst them, said, "You know what? Let's go ahead and not do that. Right? Let's not send money. Let's not get involved. Let's let them." Hash out their own deal because we have things that we are economically tied to over there, and we don't need to go mess that up, right? Um, and then now, right, moving forward, we're in Iran. Like, it's how do we justify like the old American position? And I'm going to say the old American position was better. Why? Because we were at our golden age, our peak, our independence, right? How do people look at that versus looking at what Donald Trump's doing now and say, no, let's go do what we're doing in the Middle East now versus like back then when we were at our golden age?
Well, I think that after World War II, the British, or the European, I'll say British because that's the most obvious connection, managed to hand the empire over to us. They tried to do that after World War I, but nobody here would take it. So we became the keepers and expanders of the globalist world. So it's very different from anything that this country was built around. And focusing specifically on Iran right now, we have basically been at war with them ever since the 50s with the revolution that we funded there. We put the Shah in, so that was a pseudo ally for a while. Then the Islamic Revolution, and ever since then we have been essentially in a state of war with Iran. Do they pose any risk to us? No, not really. In fact, not really is understated. No, they don't. Have they done anything aggressively towards us? No. Does Israel want them to go away? Yes, sure. They're their biggest challenge in the area. But to be clear, these other Arab countries know that if you look at the Greater Israel Project, they're the next thing on the menu, Turkey in particular. So that's one of the reasons why the other Arab states have denied U.S. access to the airspace, which isn't saying we just won't go in there anyway. I think we probably will, but like I say, they're eating the elephant one bite at a time, and the biggest first bite's Iran.
Right. And so that's the one thing. Okay, so moving forward again, it's like now we're at this point where we're looking at war with Iran. We're about 1,000 miles off their shore. Um, and it's kind of like I've seen a lot of things. And one thing is that people are starting to question that idea. What are we getting from Israel? What is our reciprocity with them? We don't get anything from them, right? Their right to live in that clip, right? Their right to live is our money, our tax-paying dollars, and eventually we got to ask ourselves, what do the taxpayers get out of all this? Ron Paul asked it very well on Tucker, or stated what his platform was, and I wholeheartedly agree. It's what do we get from these wars? What do we get from the globalist agenda? What do we get from Israel? And the answer to that is nothing. We get nothing from Israel, but bloodshed and essentially economic destruction of our own selves. And it's like now Donald Trump has sold his soul, which I guess it was natural with his name in the Epstein files. And you see some of those pictures, which are very disturbing, and I know people they're the media is trying to run with the he called the cops on Epstein the one time, but it's like the pictures tell other stories there.
Trump's a lot of these people he knew and interacted with professionally way before he was president. Maybe that's something that should have got a little bit more thought or consideration beforehand.
Yeah, and I think that I don't know, I think that people were just so tired of everything that's been leading up to this moment, that anybody to sell a story to him would have been the vote. And it's unfortunate, because you've, like Ron Paul said, you have very few people that are honest over there in that, kind of demonic city. But if we go back, right? The question of what do we get? Now, I've also seen the question of not the question of, it was the statement that, Iran has turned its back on America. Iran has turned its back on the West by moving to China and Russia. And I really thought about that. I thought wholeheartedly. I thought long and hard, right? And then I asked the question of why the hell wouldn't they?
Why wouldn't they?
Yeah. Why wouldn't they turn their back? What have we in our history with them given them to trust us?
Well, what Western involvement with the developing world has followed basically, a simple playbook that winds up with U.S. corporate interests taking their assets. The country winds up horribly in debt, and this is all done by educating, then buying off a ruling class. It's happened time after time. They don't benefit from it. The people here don't benefit from it. And it's not, even you go back to the British Empire, it wasn't that much different, but most of the countries where the Brits went into you look at them over a 20, 30, 40-year period of time and you say, yeah, they had some benefit from it. It wasn't completely one-sided. Involvement with the Western powers, the U.S. after World War II, not too much of an upside, really.
Well, I think to add on to that, right, is that if we look at just Western involvement in general, right, over there in that area, the most important thing that comes to my mind right now is the Carnatic Wars, right? The Carnatic Wars say everything that
Right.
the Near East need to know or understand about what happens when Western powers come in. And now I'm gonna boast about Thomas Handelside Perkins, because not once did he ever go in there and start waging war and killing people in the East Indies or the Indian Ocean trade, or even in China. He went in there very diplomatic. He was able to sit down, honorably have a conversation, and spark some kind of relationship that was mutual, even with people that hated him and were waiting for him to die, like the Jewish merchants and the, even his own his own, heirs to the company were waiting. But he did that very peacefully, very honorably, right? But if we look at the Carnatic Wars, Perkins isn't the norm. He was the guy that played the game better. But the Carnatic Wars, again, is everything we need to know, because what happens, we went in there and not only removed a Catholic country from there, we essentially decided which ruling party, the Baghdadi financiers, were going to come out on top. And why is not we? I'm sorry, the East India Company, is because they wanted to consume those areas, right? And so I think when people look at that, this is another area of history that we need to understand. And the 7 Year War is so poorly covered. And that's specifically why, because you can see where these relationships with these Near Eastern countries are going, or Asian countries, is because we will go in there, create a war, decide which ruling party is in power. And then at the end of it, we will sink our teeth so far into that economic system that we will destroy not just them, but the West in the process. The essentially the Nabobs that were over there, they kept sucking that country dry, and they got to the point where Europe and England were on the verge of collapse, which is why the Mad King George, if you want to call him mad, he wasn't, started going after these companies because they were destroying everything.
There's a basic mathematical relationship we got to keep in mind here, because I think it's kind of critical to it. Capital wants to grow exponentially, if not greater than that, because it then attracts other capital. No economy can grow exponentially. In fact, economic growth isn't something that's guaranteed at all. It requires more people, more resources, changes of technology. And if you don't have those things, you once you reach full employment, you don't grow. So what does capital do? Because it can't expand, it moves outward. So whereas, like in the United States, capital initially funded industrial advancement and did that for a long time because the country could grow easily. It was very large, had a lot of resources. When that couldn't happen anymore, it went out. And that's when you go from industrial capitalism to financialized capitalism, and it destroys what it created. But by going out, it's just an expansion of debt. And you can keep expanding, but there comes a time when you can't, when the people you have to basically take over don't go along with the plan. And that's where we're at now. That's what happened with Rome. It grew rapidly, grew more slowly, couldn't grow at all, collapsed. And that with, I won't say just America, but the Western globalism, it's grown rapidly, but now it's basically just growing in debt, and it doesn't produce anything. It produces less and less and has more and more. So the only way you do that is by taking things from other people one way or another through financial system. And the next people in line aren't compliant with that anymore.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, right? Is that we're so we can cut, because there's 2 points here, right? Before we get to Iran and the main point, right, is that we see that, right? America doesn't produce anything anymore. We've regulated everything to death, to where we don't have our own industries, and the youth of America is almost, well, they are going to be wage slaves forever. And judging by a few other videos that I've posted, I have got thumbs down. Not that I care if you like my videos or not, but don't dislike a video. But if you're a boomer, and that's saying America needs to care more about its generations coming up, is because look at us. We've expanded to the point where we've removed our industry, and now we got to go take it from other people, which wasn't what the American identity was about. The American identity was to make sure all resources in America were being used for Americans, to help America grow, right? And there was no need to go take it from anywhere else. Even the opium fields in Smyrna, it was like those weren't taken; those were bought and those were controlled. Um, and so that's again, it's like, but how do we fix that to go backwards? How would we what would we do to say, hey, let's slow our roll. We're not going with this foreign power. We're not Israel first. We want our industries to come back. We want those oil fields in America back. We want our steel our foundries to come back. We want our merchants to be loyal to us and do what we say. And we want our farming industry, which they're working so very, very hard to get rid of, so that we die. And that's the ultimate goal. People need to understand that they're getting rid of a farming industry for that specific purpose. Like, how do we decide that, hey, I don't want Bill Gates to buy land in Texas? How do we, where do we go? How do we get backwards? And again, I'm moving towards Iran, because I want to talk about Cuba and Venezuela after this, with this whole
Sure.
idea of the Monroe Doctrine. But
Well,
how do
it
we
takes
go?
it. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, how do we go backwards? That's where I was going with
It's
that.
very hard to go backwards. So when Trump was saying we need to reindustrialize, yeah, I agree with that, but it's hard to do it without a breakdown and reset. Why? Is because you have to take actions that are against the best interest of capital. The only time that ever happens is accidentally and abruptly. So it takes an extraordinary amount of political and economic will. It takes sacrifice. And I don't see it. We're really going the opposite direction. We're creating a continuing inflate assets, really at an increasingly fast pace. And Trump was bragging about that. Hey, look at your pension fund. Well, yeah, if you have a pension fund, if you don't, it didn't help you. The industrialization did a lot of things. It provided employment where ordinary people could start a family, support themselves, provide for their retirement, and it taught characteristics. So a lot of times people my age will look at your age or younger and say, "Oh, these people are lazy. They don't have good work skills." Blah blah blah. They weren't in a position to develop good work skills because the only jobs that existed are these service sector sort of things. I worked under people that were mentors to me that largely taught me how to think, taught me how to behave, taught me how to be honorable. And those experiences aren't common anymore. They were common in the industrial economy.
Right. So that's the point. So there's the irony, right? We see with Donald Trump and his reindustrialization, is that he's protecting the very people that did that, but at the same time, he's also protecting the very people that wanted to make sure nobody learned anything so they couldn't steal their job. Right. It's kind of the taking care of competition quickly, but at the same time, you're investing at that point when you're looking at these people wanting their homes to stay valuable, wanting everything to stay just the way it is for them, right? If they have a pension, if they don't, they're gonna be screwed, which is generally not them. It's that generation. um they're investing in a dying generation, right? There's nothing really left after that, because the rest of us are scraping by with what we can get. And the wages obviously aren't the same. What takes, what a single income family, could during that time survive off of, is much different than what a single income family can today. And so when he says things like that, and then wants to protect that generation, and it's not nothing I mean, some people have a lot of things against them. I admire the industry that was there, that they took care of, and they did. But at the same time, it's like we need to see the youth at this point. We need to see the survival of the country, and the reindustrialization lands on younger generations, not the same generation that did it.
Yeah, I think we've kind of lost the recipe on how to do a lot of things. I worked played a significant role in the C-17. If we had to start over and do something like that again, we have a very, very difficult time doing it. Could Boeing develop a civilian airliner from scratch at this point? Well, we haven't done it for a very long time. That's certainly not a certainty.
Right. And so, but again, so moving forward, right? We're gonna get bogged down here. That's a good conversation to have. Is
Yeah,
that
let's move on.
yeah? Is that to fix this idea, right? Is that now he's like we're looking at Iran, but at the same time we're looking at Iran, he's got to figure out the repercussions of that, right? And so he's blockading Cuba. Right, we stole a president from Venezuela, and now we're threatening, we're threatening whatever with Greenland, which I think is still in talks, so they stopped talking about it altogether. Um, right, it's like that seems so much more work, versus just kind of hitting the reset button and staying at home. Or it's like going to the idea of the barter system, like, hey, if this, we'll give you this for that if we could work together with the real Monroe Doctrine.
Not the
Right.
Donroe Doctor.
Not the Donroe Doctrine. I'm talking about the real Monroe, what
Yeah.
Monroe meant, which is the idea, not the Donroe, because we don't need to go doing what we do. That's too much extra. It's the Monroe Doctrine, which is the idea of like this: we're a good faith republic in the Western Hemisphere. We have it was to set up the barter system, to work together rather than this. But we've gotten so far from what we started with, and we've expanded so far. It's like, why do they think that adventurism is better than slowing the roll and saying let's re-examine our economic system? And I'm not saying let's go to socialism because that's stupid, but I'm saying we can go back to a basic form of capitalism with the barter system involved.
Well, when you have capitalism and not just central banks, but a cartel of central banks that can create money out of nothing, that's not capitalism. That's capitalism can be defined, different ways. I know a lot of folks, I think, look at I got to go back to the Jewish model of capitalism as being what the West is really all about, but it's kind of a predatory, financialized capitalism. Again, if I could stick to one point though, the central banks, network central banks with the ability to create currency out of nothing. At that point, you do not have market conditions. You have enough levers for a government or a government-like entity to basically tilt the playing field any way they want, and that's what's happened.
Right, you control, but then that only gets you so far. We'll see that some of that with the repercussions here of Iran. So let's move to Iran because that's kind of the main
Good
point of
idea.
this one here. But it's been good so far, right? We've kind of covered
Sure.
our history going up to it, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so it's great to kind of set a context because I think a lot of people need to understand that what we're doing has a history, and that history is very important that nobody wants to talk about. And so right now we're 1,000 feet off the coast of Iran. We're facing a regional war.
Thousand miles.
Miles. I'm sorry. Let me correct. I did not mean that. I meant 1,000 miles.
I
Uh,
understand.
Forgive me. That was I know. It's fun. And so we're facing a regional war that has great consequences. When we get involved in it, and we're looking at two powers that we didn't want connected, now connected because of what we're doing here, and on top of Venezuela. Um, and so we're looking at an interesting shift in power, is what I'd say. There was a power vacuum. America's almost all but fallen, right? Is that Israel has destroyed any credibility that we had left, and I'm not gonna say we had much left, but we had some. And it's been destroyed so much to the point that I think they naturally created a power vacuum in this world, because they've gone so far away from the founding principles or founding pillars of the West, right? And that's not what they wanted. They wanted to control the hegemony, but I think we're going to have a struggle, and no matter what is said in these conversations, I think that Iran will be the great clashing point. This will be where the great war is because we're at a point where Russia and China want to not restructure, but go back to the multipolar, the
Multipolar.
economic, multiple economic centers, which it's always been that way.
Mhm.
And so to go back to that and have people to return to their corner of the globe and leave everybody else alone, the internet, what people believed international law should have been. And so Where are we at with this? What is your take as far as that goes?
Okay, so let's specifically talk about where we're at right now. The U.S. has one carrier group, and I guess another one going to the region. They moved a lot of assets to the regional air bases, F-35s in particular. There's probably enough there to generate a very significant aerial strike. Now, what's not known is how Iran would be able to weather that. I'm quite certain that they are far more prepared to do that than they were last summer with Russian anti-air systems, in particular Chinese assets, and then a Russian-assisted command control communication system, which will also enable them to guide missiles much better than they could otherwise. So the question initially is, if there's a large assault from the U.S., and maybe with the aid of Israel, will Iran be able to weather that? Will they respond? And I think the answer is going to be yes and yes. And how will they respond? How long will they be able to continue to respond? The U.S. can, based on what these box launchers on the ships, they're going to be out of stuff in 5 days, and they have to go back to port to reload those. They can't be reloaded at sea. So you have something that's maybe a 5 or 10 day capability to keep up on the part of the United States. Don't know how well the aircraft are going to make out. Some of the Chinese anti-air radar systems supposedly can handle the F-35. We'll just have to see. What happens in the first wave is going to be fairly telling. I think Israel is going to get pummeled. Iran has replaced all the missiles they used. They didn't use their first line missiles. They have some new things. They have ability. The ships have to stay 1,000 miles off the coast, and I wouldn't be surprised if you saw ships get either sunk or severely damaged from this. This could possibly not go real well. So for the U.S. So for any of this to work, though, the idea that you can get regime change from air power is absurd. People have thought that in the First World War. They thought that in the Second World War. With that, air power has always been way overrated. And in Iraq, excuse me, thought that as well. The idea that you're going to bomb them and then have your groups that were sponsored by the CIA and Massoud suddenly pop up and take care of everything, and suddenly Shah number 3's back in town. That's just not going to happen. It's not realistic. It's not supported by any historical precedent. This is going to go badly for the U.S. The only question is how badly. If you wind up with several thousand U.S. personnel killed in the short period of time, this is going to be hard to explain. No president has lost aircraft carriers. That could happen.
So let's look just first with your experience, right? You're 1,000 miles off the coast, right? Looking at our air power capability, what kind of range does that give? They kind of just got to go in and then turn right back around, right?
No, well, the missiles, that's about the Tomahawk missiles. That's around the limits of their range. Would they be able to operate refueling operations there? Yeah, to a degree, but that's going to have to be standoff as well. Iran's a huge place. By the way, in the July war, I guess it was the 12-day war, there was what I was reading recently. There was one S-400 Russian anti-missile system that was installed and operational. It was around a place where Russians were, and the U.S. didn't go anywhere near that, or Israel didn't go anywhere near that. you might have a whole bunch of those now.
Right.
It's
Then
going to be really
that's
interesting.
yeah, that's the one thing, right? And another thing that comes to mind, I was actually curious about. I don't know if you've seen anything or have a comment on that. Is the idea that Russian submarines, right? Is they seem to be far better than what we could offer, and we seem to keep losing them across the globe, right? And then they pop up in places we don't necessarily want them to. Well, we don't. I'm sorry that the American, military doesn't want them to be, right? Are they, has there been any word as far as are they moving those closer to this area, just to say let's get this over with and move on.
Well, Iran's trying to develop their own submarines. I doubt seriously Russia would get directly involved. If they wanted to, yeah, they could sink every U.S. ship there. What's happened since World War II is that the missile, anti-missile, and submarine technologies have changed greatly, improved greatly. The carriers, on the other hand, and the surface ships have not, and probably cannot. So this carrier battle group projection of power, if you had really an unconstrained war with a peer-to-peer with submarine and Russian type missile capability, would wind up being decimated in extremely short order.
Okay. Yeah, right. And especially with what you got, one carrier and two destroyers, I think, that were in that strike group that showed up.
Yeah, I
Uh
think it'd be 51 class.
the next
destroyers.
question though is launching jets, right? With China and Russia, moving heavy military aircraft into that area. Um the plan, I guess they wanted, not Russia and China, but America, would be to go and drop bombs, right, and then get out. The same thing they've done multiple times in the past, is that with those heavy aircraft, there's there, um would they get close enough to, or is that speculation as far as the plan? Does that ruin the plan as far as analytics go?
Well, if you look at what happened in Ukraine, fighter planes, even the ones with say fairly good low capabilities, they've basically been used as a way to launch a missile from a forward position, and they've not fared well. They've been shot down. It's been very dangerous to be in the air in a fixed wing aircraft there. So what will happen here? Clearly you're not going to fly over there with the B-52. That would have absolutely no survivability. You can have fighter bombers. They carry much smaller loads. Could have a B2, could maybe have a B1. There are not many of those. I don't think that would be. It's somewhat low observable, but I don't think that would survive very well. You'd have to have a whole bunch of them and operating almost freely, and that's not what this is going to be. U.S. is engaged in wars where they had complete air superiority over really third-rate opposition. That's not what this is going to be.
Yeah, I think this is a conflict this is why I say that it's kind of, the power has shifted, right? There's a vacuum that needs to be filled at this point. Is because it's like it's not the typical Near Eastern country, even though we've never beaten a Near Eastern country yet. And people can say that they want,
Didn't we destroy the Hutus recently?
The Houthis. Yeah, it's like,
Houthis,
didn't we do that? Yeah. Didn't we do that? It's like, no,
I don't think we
group
did we?
Yeah.
No, it didn't
And
work.
that's the point. We haven't won a Near Eastern war, and people can thump their chest all they want to, but it's like, we got beat in Afghanistan. The objective was not complete in Iraq. The Houthis, at the call of Israel, they beat us. They pushed us back.
We lost it. We lost a bunch of Predator drones and I think 3 F-18s. They weren't shot down directly, but when the carriers evading the missiles, making sharp moves, they went over the side. I think maybe 1 or 2 of them were damaged in flight too, but yeah, it didn't work out good.
Yeah, it didn't work out. And so I'm curious, because this moves into a regional war. It's like all the people that we had some kind of friendship with, loose friendship, I'm going to say, is that it's like we got military bases on the other side of the Persian Gulf. It's like we're relying on them to keep some kind of friendship, which they already denied.
They already
Right. So
denied.
it's
Yeah.
like we've already lost a regional war just based off analytics alone, because it's like the Saudis are going to go clear house, and not only that is that the Iran's going to sweep through those military bases pretty easily. Um, the game plan seems like one of those, again, it seems kind of that not thought through very well, and that we're looking at the president of the United States, Bibi Netanyahu, coming into Washington.
I
And
don't
I
remember voting for him. Did you vote for him?
I did not vote for him, and nor would I ever vote for anybody that has that flag as next to their name. And again, it's like that meeting. They shut down the freeways, everything, get a huge motorcade. Um, to where what we're looking at the idea is like, oh, we're gonna fire on Iran. And I hate to say it because I don't want to get to eschatology, but it's like, does Israel believe that they're gonna fare well in a regional war? If America, that group loses, America can't go in to Iran. They can't put troops on the ground.
And America can't put true. And at that point, the moment we tried, that would be everybody would wake up then. Yeah, Iran is 3 times bigger than Iraq. 3 times.
That's what I'm saying. The sheer size alone, and the fact that they're tired of us. Like I'm tired of us, right? And it's like we've gone so far away from what we were founded on. Is that America? Those strike groups will get destroyed, and President Trump will be the first president to lose a carrier, and probably a destroyer, and another destroyer, and another carrier. Right? 2 strike groups, I think, will go away. The bombs won't work. You can't do regime change from the air, and you obviously can't do regime change from the ground, because Mossad showed their complete lack of ability to do anything um by the whole protest, which failed miserably. Right? If that regional war takes place and America is booted out, which again they will, uh they're gonna the region's gonna wake up and collapse on Israel. It's gonna be pretty easy and pretty simple. And no, it's not eschatology. No, it's not revelation. It's just gonna happen. Right?
Yeah, it's just
Is
going to
that's the
happen.
outcome.
Yeah.
Does BB understand this? Does he think that he could act this way for perpetually?
I think that he and Trump are both have a great deal of faith in Western superiority. But anybody that's knows this from the perspective of an engineer, a scientist, has known that's been going away for 20 years. Andrei Martinoff wrote several books on the end of U.S. military superiority. This has been something that's very easy to foresee. As soon as the Russians fired successfully several versions of a hypersonic missile, and I think that was probably over 15 years ago. Hypersonic missile, something that can go 6 times the speed of sound. The U.S. has never been able to master that technology. It was clear that changes were coming, and the Russians, by all the sanctions against them, were forced out of this international trade system to where they had to develop their own things. They had to produce their own things, and they've done that very well. They're producing commercial aircraft now. So the very thing that we've run away from, they've run to, and that's been to their benefit.
Yeah, they've built up their own industry, which is what anybody should do, right? Especially when you kind of see the global climate, is that you either figure this out now or continue to be the not just the enemy, but somebody's going to make a move on you. Larry Johnson said it best, I think, is that one, Russia wants these conversations done, this conflict over, because they're going to just go in and sweep house in Ukraine, right? And
Yeah,
finish,
yeah.
finish that conflict, and that this whole conflict between us and Iran, or not us, I'm going to say Trump and Iran, because I didn't order this, nor did my representative, I believe, vote on war against Iran, because I don't think they put a declaration of war in place. Right. So between Trump and Iran, it's like these are we need to get a move on. I think at this point, he can't get out of this one.
It doesn't seem like it to me.
You can't really backpedal. I mean, they're obsessed with those missiles that, but it's like, who's going to give up their right to defend themselves? Because as we've seen here, everybody should have the right to defend themselves and survive as a country, right?
You
According to
need it.
Israel.
You need
Yeah,
it.
according to the Zionists that were on the screen earlier, it's like you got to have a defense system. You don't have a defense system, you aren't a country at all.
Yeah.
And so it's this. I don't know. I'm curious. Do you think this will happen? I mean, what? How far away are we from the joint naval?
Well, I was really hoping he'd step back, and I hope I'm wrong here, but I think there are so many people around him pushing him to do this and telling him that it will work. By the way, most U.S. military analysts are people with sociology degrees. They shouldn't be forming an opinion, much less expressing one. But there's so much pressure around him. I think he's going to do it. I would put it at about 80%. I hope I'm wrong.
But he doesn't have a lot of time to strike the opportunity, right? How far away are we from that joint naval drill?
Well, about 10 days now, so he's going to have to be right away. It'd have to be, and to give him some time to operate, it'd have to be in the next 5 days for sure.
Right, and I think that it's got to be before they get there, because then the repercussions go up that much more. And it's really at this point, as someone who also wants this conflict to go away so we can figure out how to make America actually better. It's like we need to get on with this, right? But it's like at this point, I think he's really got one option, and that's to pull the trigger.
That's the way I'm seeing it. Again, I hope we're both wrong, but I don't think so.
Yeah.
I'll be happy to come back, if we do this again next week and say, boy, I'm wrong and I'm glad. But,
well, we'll be here next week. We'll be doing this next week,
yeah.
having this conversation. I hope I am too. I hope that Trump somehow accidentally wakes up tomorrow and says, you know what, I need to get rid of these guys that are pestering me or controlling me and my policy. But then again, I look at the Epstein files, and this is like a desperation, right? You can't recover either way, right? You can't. You really got nowhere else to go. The Epstein files has his name and his pictures, and you have everybody in that ruling class around him in those files. And then he's got war. I think again, I go with Larry Johnson and what was it, Colonel Wilkerson? Is that there's got to be a distraction from that. And I think Macy, and the way those conversations were going with Massey and Pam Bondi, who was doing a very terrible job at having any kind of conversation on it. And it turned into essentially answering a question with gibberish, right? I think that you either figure out the ruling class or you have a war to distract people, and that would be to stop those hearings that are happening.
You need one distraction from the other distraction. It's all meltdown.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. We have had a very good conversation. Actually, I think this is one of the best so far, and we're picking up steam on this, and we'll come back because I think that we need to see how I think there will be more moves on the Western Hemisphere to try and control the repercussions of what he's going to do next. As far as our kind of every place around us, I really believe that that's kind of what he's trying to figure out now. And so we'll be back next week on Thursday as usual to talk about kind of where we're at now and go more into depth, and hopefully more on everything else, and more about Iran, and hopefully we'll have more on the Epstein files, because that seems to be fun as those things coming out. But
we can talk about that for a while. We'll save some of that for next week.
Yeah, we'll say a lot for next week, and it's kind of a big topic. But like I said, guys, we need to understand that in 1787, the counter-revolution to fight against this ruling class was waged, and it was waged very successfully. And Thomas Handyside Perkins came in as a second generation of a founding father, and made America independent. made America free from these people, free from their control and their financial influence, and in fact, prevented them all the way up to his death. The one last meeting he had in London was sitting at a table with the Rothschilds, and I imagine if I were there, it would be saying that I won, and leave us alone. But he would die very shortly after that in 1854, and John Murray Forbes, whose counting house, by the way, still exists, turned into a Rothschild shill and created war for them. So we need to understand that America can go back. We just need to start thinking of ourselves and industries at home. But we definitely need to understand the history of this entire conflict, because there's a lot to it. And it's not as simple as the Fox News narrative or the CNN and all that other blue versus red bullshit. So thank you for tuning in. I appreciate y'all every week. I know I see y'all all watching this. Hopefully we can get you to stay for the whole episode and not just the shorts. But hey, looking at the shorts, that's cool too. Thank you for tuning in. You have now become part of the Dissenting Goyim Club, and we appreciate that. Keep thinking for yourself, and remember that the individual thought, the freedom of thought, the ability to go and look things up and make your own opinion and hit the archives and talk and learn some kind of history on the subject. You are there, you have it. Don't ever let anybody take that from you, and don't ever take that for granted. We appreciate you. You keep us going. You keep the lights on. Please like, subscribe, share, comment. Please, please, please. We appreciate y'all. We'll see you next week.